welcome to Dreamland, a program dedicated to an examination of areas in the human experience not easily nor neatly put in a box. Things seen at the edge of vision, awakening a part of the mind as yet not mapped, and yet things every bit as real as the air we breathe but don't see. This is Dreamland. It absolutely is. Good evening, everybody. Sunday evening, another Dreamland. I'm Art Bell. And we'll have the usual lineup in that Linda Howe is here this evening. She'll be with us in a moment from Philadelphia, which she calls home. And then a bit of a different tack this morning. John Zajack, who is a physicist and author of The Delicate Balance, will be here. And he's got a bit of a different theory on the Great Pyramids. So we'll talk with him right after Linda Howe. At any rate, I think you'll find it a fascinating adventure into areas, as the billboarding said, where things are not so neatly or easily put into a box. And now all the way to Philadelphia and Linda Howe. Well, good evening, Linda. Are you there?
Yes,
good.
And, a couple of weeks I talked with Dr. Eugene Shoemaker, who was one of the co-discoverers of those strings of comet pieces that have been bombarding Jupiter for the last week.
Shoemaker-Levy 9.
And he described the potential impact that some of those gigantic pieces would have made on our planet if they had hit here.
Yes.
Essentially being a major catastrophe. And today in the paper in Philadelphia, they did a large headline asking, could it happen here? Basically following up the same idea that Dr. Shoemaker and I were talking about, what would happen in terms of an asteroid impact. And they reported something very surprising that I think is important for us all to keep in mind, and consistent with the Dreamland theme, that many things don't fit in any of the neat boxes that we think about. This is a quote. In 1989, a half-mile-wide asteroid flew through Earth's orbit. The Earth had been at that exact point only 6 hours earlier.
Oops.
This was reported in a journal to the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. The quote from this House of Representatives report continues, had that asteroid in 1989 struck the Earth, it would have caused a disaster unprecedented in human history, unquote. To think that we passed within 6 hours of a asteroid that was the same size as Fragment A that impacted on Jupiter and caused the first big bruise on that enormous planet, and that we came that close without any of us really realizing at the time, I think is a sobering fact.
Well, it's sobering, Linda. I've always thought that they did not know about this, apparently, until after it occurred. So
after it had happened, that's right. And they also ask a question that I think everybody should also give some serious thought to in this universe we live in. What is more likely to kill you in a lifetime? A hurricane, a flood, a volcano, an earthquake, a lightning strike, a shark, a grizzly bear, a poisonous snake, or a terrorist bomb? And the answer is that more than any of those would be a comet or an asteroid smashing into the Earth. The odds are the same risk as flying in an airplane anywhere.
Wow.
Yeah. And in addition to the fact that what has just happened on Jupiter could happen in our lifetime or maybe in the next 1,000 years to this Earth with yet unknown consequences, as the violence has subsided on Jupiter, it has raised even more mysteries now with scientists who have some really interesting questions to solve. And among those are, what is all the black stuff at the impact sites? It might be sulfur, but no one knows for certain. How long will these big dark bruises stay on Jupiter's face now? And the answer is maybe months, and that they will be visible for amateur telescope watchers. So anyone listening who still wants to see these dark spots on Jupiter's face, they are visible through amateur telescopes right now.
Linda, one thing that a lot of people are asking, I'm asking in my own mind with regard to the dark spots, Richard Hoagland, incidentally, thinks they're carbon. But whatever they are, Jupiter has a very violent atmosphere, and it's surprising that, in effect, they have not been quickly erased.
Yeah, and everyone is tracing that, and in fact, I'm going to play an excerpt from an interview here from Dr. Andrew Ingersoll, who is professor of planetary science at the California Institute of Technology in Pasadena. He is going to be summarizing all of the 70-some Jupiter studies for a major scientific review in Bethesda, Maryland in October. And he talked to me yesterday about several of the surprises they have so far, and they expect more to come, including the dark stuff, which he personally thinks is sulfur, and the issue of a carboniferous chondrite made-up sort of comet hitting Jupiter is beginning to have a big question mark at the tail of it, because they have yet to find any presence of oxygen or water. And as this interview begins, Dr. Ingersoll is discussing that very fact, which currently is one of the biggest puzzles so far at the end of this impact, because it might not have been a comet at all. It may have been a broken-up asteroid. This is Dr. Andrew Ingersoll, planetary scientist from Caltech.
So I think the big thing we've learned is that there's not a lot of oxygen, either dredged up from Jupiter or else brought in with the comet.
Is that there was no signs of water?
Very little indication of water, because in this hydrogen-rich environment, the oxygen you expect to be tied up with hydrogen in the form of water. And comets are made out of ices, and Jupiter is thought to have water clouds deep down, and that kind of result is already pretty firm, and I think over the next few weeks we're going to firm it up some more and discover that people may discover traces of oxygen. But I think the lack of oxygen is so pronounced that we can say we already know that. It's already a big mystery. Now, if your question is how long will it take us to figure out the mystery, that might take a little longer.
Well, isn't the implication of the mystery that the comet itself may not have been an icy snowball, but must be made of something else completely different?
That's certainly part of it. The comet really couldn't have been what we normally think of as a comet. It might have been a rocky asteroid, in fact. The latest results suggest that it might be just that. The latest results show that there's metal in the comet that are now seen in Jupiter's atmosphere. Like magnesium and silicon. And you can get metals if you vaporize a rock and break the molecules of silicon dioxide and so on up into their constituent pieces. So one implication is that the comet wasn't a comet at all, but perhaps a rocky object like an asteroid. The other implication is that the comet didn't go deep enough to dredge up water from Jupiter's interior.
Meaning that it may have been vaporized on the surface.
Well, yeah, if you can speak of its surface, but...
or the upper atmosphere.
The upper atmosphere, yeah. From the tops of the clouds that we normally see to the zone where the water is about 100 kilometers. And it's quite possible that the comet burned up before it got down that far.
If Jupiter had no water molecules in the atmosphere at all, therefore no oxygen, what would that say to you?
Well, that would be just one of the most upsetting things to our current understanding of how the solar system formed. And, of course, we all have open minds to that possibility that Jupiter just has no water and has no oxygen. But it's probably the last thing we're going to give up, faced with a lot of barrage of new data.
So, Art, right now, the sum is they haven't been able to see the water and the oxygen that they had expected, especially if this was an icy comet that was breaking up in the upper atmosphere of Jupiter. This is truly one of the biggest mysteries so far from this impact. And
boy, it is. It is, Linda.
And it may not have been a comet at all. It may have been a large asteroid that broke up and was all kind of a hard metallic rocky material, and that may be why they have got in the spectrograph some of these metals.
Well, that's fascinating. And I'm sure this is going to continue to unravel over the next many months, isn't it?
Yes, and I'm going to continue to talk with Dr. Shoemaker, Dr. Ingersoll, some of the others, because each scientist around the country, I have a list of about 75 or 80 of them, they're taking different aspects of of all of this data, and I think periodically I will try to bring some brief updates. I thought tonight it was definitely worth going into this in depth. And next week, when I'm your full-time guest, I plan to give you some fascinating updates on what's been happening in the crop circles. We've been in Canada, the United States, and England. New mutilation cases with some very interesting anomalies and reports. And if I have anything more to report next week concerning scientific discoveries on the Jupiter impact, I will certainly, we can talk about that too.
Good. I'm also getting reports on my regular syndicated program, Linda, of crop circles up in the Washington State area. You've been hearing about that?
Yes, there was one that I know of that has two parts to it, and it's the only formation I know. It's in the same field, and I have a drawing of it, and the size is about 150 feet in diameter, and it is actually resonant with both a formation that was in England 2 or 3 years ago and with the current new one that's up in Ontario, Canada, which I'm getting videotape and photographs and have a drawing from, and we're also getting analysis on the wheat from the one in Ontario. So by next weekend, I probably will be able to report some of the preliminary data on that.
All right. The gal who called, by the way, tells me she has photographs, and she's sending them to you.
Great. Was that Iowis or Carol Patterson?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I wouldn't have gotten the names, but but somebody's doing it.
Well, that's good. And so even while our attention has been out in the solar system, much has been happening on our own planet in these strange other mysteries.
Excellent. Linda, we'll look forward to it next week and your full guest appearance next week.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to it.
Take care, Linda.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. If you would like to reach Linda Howe, the way to do it is to write to her, and I've got her address here. And I might add that her documentary, her new documentary, Strange Harvest 1993, is available now for $35. That's on videotape. And, of course, you can also get one of her publications, Glimpses of Other Realities, the most recent, $45. And Linda Howe's address is Post Office Box 538, Huntingdon Valley, Pennsylvania. Once again, Post Office Box 538, Huntingdon, Huntingdon, Valley, Pennsylvania, zip code 19006. So whether you want some of her materials or you would like to contact her regarding a sighting or anything else, that is the appropriate address. And in a moment, we'll be back with a physicist and author whose name is John Zajack, and I hope I'm getting that correct. It's the first thing we'll ask him about. Right back to John.
Imagine
my listener suggests that we particularly ask John about the Great Pyramid. So many people, of course, think the Great Pyramid could only have been built using some sort of alien technology. And Dr. Zajack apparently feels very differently about it, and so we're going to explore why he thinks that's a bunch of rubbish. And so here he is, from somewhere in, I think, Central California. Is that right, John?
San Jose, California.
San Jose, all right. John, I take it you do not think the Great Pyramid was constructed by the Greys?
By the grays?
Or greens or yellows or...
The polka dots and the blues?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, no, I don't. I could understand why one would think so, because even with today's technology, we cannot duplicate the Great Pyramid, even if we didn't have financial restraints and political problems and so forth. We could not reconstruct the Great Pyramid today. Apparently, science is wise enough to understand why the Great Pyramid is unique, but not so wise to be able to copy it.
All right. Well, I'm going to allow you to make your case. Tell us a little more about yourself first, though, if you would. Is it Dr. and is it Zajack? Is that correct?
Zajack is correct. There is no PhD associated with it.
All right.
My claim to fame is the ability to have a very diverse and wide background and view to be able to show commonality between seemingly unrelated fields of science, very often creating a whole new field of science in the process.
All right. How did you come upon this talent for connecting these things?
Oh, it's kind of inborn. Just a keen sense of observation and the recognition that things similar or related indeed happened in other disciplines. That has led me to some reasonable successes as Vice President of Research and Development for some leading corporations, such as Cutler-Hammer, Eaton Corporation, General Signal Corporation, Electrotech, and some others.
Oh, yes.
And with patents in many diverse areas, from chemistry to electronics, mechanics to biometrics, etc. So it's a wide field, but the field is because the greatest technological advancements typically happen when the astronomer is talking to the metallurgist or to the anthropologist. And when those seemingly unrelated scientists sit down and have dinner together and start realizing there's a common thread through their problems and put them together, then we come up with theories that can be later substantiated for the extinction of the dinosaurs, for instance.
Do you, while we're at it, do you have any thoughts? There's been a lot of talk lately, of course, about the dinosaurs because of Shoemaker-Levy 9 plowing into Jupiter and the fact that it might have happened here. Do you think they were driven extinct by some comet?
Actually, the evidence is overwhelming that that's exactly what took place. I was not just throwing some loose terms around. It actually came about that a very leading scientist, Nobel laureate actually from University of Berkeley, Alvarez, has a son. And Alvarez is in many areas of physics, very diverse by himself, now passed away. But he was having Thanksgiving dinner with his son, who was an anthropologist. And as they sat there, his son was saying that in different parts of the world, particularly in Italy, that he could find some very high levels of deposits of iridium and other such materials, and that happened about the time of the extinction of the dinosaurs. And his father says, "Wow, but do you understand that that's not popular on Earth?" He says, "Yeah, I know it's kind of rare, but what can I say is a half-inch thick layer in Italy."
Right.
He said, "Well, that's only really found in asteroids. And what you should do is check on other continents and see if it coincides, and if the layer is there as well, if it also took place at the time of the Great Extinction." Which, by the way, extinctions have happened many times in Earth's history. And sure enough, it turns out that this layer is global, and knowing the thickness of the layer, they could measure what they would anticipate the size of the impact to be. In other words, the size of the mass coming in from space.
Certainly.
And it turns out to be somewhere in the order of about 3+ miles in diameter, which fits very nicely with lots of things. They also could go backwards and check the frequency of great extinctions, which happens, every 35 million years or so, which leads to a theory that there is a black, dark companion to the sun, about 1,000 times out further than Jupiter, perhaps, that makes an elliptical path, and once every tens of millions of years comes in close enough to cause a gravitational tug, if you will, through what we would call our expanded solar system. And let me mention what that is. I mean, we know there's 9 planets. but the solar system is actually considerably bigger than that. It's as far out as our Earth has influence. And there's a whole lot of space junk left over from the beginning of our solar system. There's something called the Oort belt, if you will. It's a cloud that's sitting out very much further out than Jupiter, cannot be seen from Earth directly, and it contains something in the order of 100 billion pieces of rock junk left over from the beginning of time, with space junk in the size of 1 to 10 miles in diameter.
Oh, that's big junk. John, I'm going to ask that you hold on. We're at the bottom of the hour, so we're going to do that break, and we'll come right back to you. My guest is John Zajack, and he's got quite a story in a moment.
Dreamland with Art Bell. To participate in the program, call toll-free 1-800-618-8255. 1-800-618-8255. First-time callers, area code 702-727-1222. Or the wildcard line at 702-727-1295. This is the CBC Radio Network.
It is, and this is Dreamland. I'm Art Bell. John Zajack is my guest. And he is the author of The Delicate Balance. And we're talking about extinctions and cycles and dark suns. And John, are you there?
Yes, indeed.
There are a number of people, John, who think that not only have there been cycles of extinction, but that man has been here before, created civilization, and become extinct. Is it possible?
Well, the evidence doesn't support that. You would think that if man was on planet Earth before, that there'd be some fossil, some remnant of his existence. And to date, we haven't seen anything to support that at all.
All right. There are those who believe that it's very deeply buried within Earth, but that's probably a pretty long shot. So what is your view of how all this occurred?
Well, we're talking about a delicate balance here, and if there's one underlying theme that I keep trying to present to folks is that just because something didn't happen yesterday, last week, or last year, or maybe even for the last 1,000 years, there's no reason to assume it couldn't happen tomorrow morning or next week. The fact that we have gone through a very, very mild period in our climate and a fairly stable period in geological effects and earthquakes and so forth doesn't mean that we can automatically anticipate that trend to continue. In fact, in many cases, we can look at history and say there's no reason for it to continue. History has never been this consistent and this temperate for a long period. And with relation to that, we were talking about the Oort belt and the fact that there are 100 billion, that's with a B, pieces of space junk sitting out there in a very delicate balance. We'll use that term a few times through this discussion, I think, where these pieces are as far out at the very edge of our solar system as possible, held in place by the extremely weak forces of the pull of gravity of the rest of the galaxies and the pull of gravity of our sun. That is, being out there 1,000 times out further than Pluto, you've got to know that those forces are extremely weak. Therefore, small forces could indeed cause a disruption in that balance and cause some of that space junk to fall in towards the sun. And, of course, the Earth is in the path of some of that debris heading in towards the sun. The evidence for such is rather amazing. We tend to be comfortable about things and say, well, yeah, in the early solar system, there was lots of impacts caused upon the planet, evidenced by just looking at the moon.
Sure.
The man on the moon and all those craters are indeed obviously impacts. But the moon would have been struck by meteors considerably less frequently than the Earth itself because of Earth's greater gravitational pull. And it turns out that we have on Earth today that we can measure and observe 28 impacts still in existence, of course eroded and corroded and covered over by growth and so forth. But 28 major impacts. Major impact is between 1 and 100 miles in diameter. Now, when we talk about the average piece of space junk that's between, something between 1 and 10, we pick the arbitrary number 5 miles in diameter. A 5-mile diameter piece of space junk with an average velocity of just under 50,000 miles per hour crashing into planet Earth would indeed cause a a meteor impact about 100 miles in diameter. It would throw up so much dust and debris that we would immediately go into a new ice age. Certainly sunlight would be blocked out, and if animals and humans didn't die immediately from the shock, from the quake, from the inhalation of dust, one would certainly think that food growing would be extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible, for some length of time, probably years, but would throw us immediately into an ice age.
That is the rough equivalent, is it not, of a nuclear winter?
It is indeed where the theory for nuclear winter came from.
Well, all right.
It's kind of interesting, but it's backwards.
I'm just curious, John, if you were to do projections, as they do with nuclear warfare,
right,
and this were to occur based on current technology,
right,
how many people, if anybody, would survive?
Maybe, handfuls of people would survive. Let me give you for instance. For instance, in the American arsenal, we talk about having 10,000 nuclear weapons, thermonuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm.
The Russians claim to have 9,000 or 10,000, but our resources suggest perhaps 40,000. However, the average size of the American arsenal is about half a megaton. It's roughly a little bit bigger than that, approaching 1 megaton for the Russians. If we added what's known of the American and Russian arsenals together, and even added in all the stuff we think the Russians are hiding, we're talking in the vicinity of 50,000 weapons, less than 1 megaton apiece. That would be to say that if World War III broke out and every single weapon got used and went off, we're talking in the terms of 50,000 megatons.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If something the size of a 5-mile diameter struck the Earth, we wouldn't be talking about 50,000 megatons. We'd be talking 100 million megatons.
Big bang. Of course,
big bang.
Of course, it would be concentrated in one location versus a nuclear exchange being in many, or almost all locations.
Well, that may or may not be true completely. And as we've just seen, the gravitational pull of Jupiter broke apart the comet that smacked into it. We might see fragmentation or companion parts as well. It has been... two thoughts come to mind in this regard. It has been pretty much shown by now that we've seen this comet break up that if we look at the moon and other places, that many of the impact craters are in straight lines, which pretty much says that it's multiple impact.
So it'd be like a shotgun blast.
Well, one blast would be enough to do it, but we might not have the luxury of only having half the Earth destroyed. Certainly, when you throw debris up into the atmosphere, you cause enough of a global problem from a standpoint of falling dust and blocking out of the sun to cause very, very many problems. Not only from inhalation of the dust itself, which is, of course, even during volcanic eruptions, what has killed many people, but because of the sudden change in temperature. Here on planet Earth, it's kind of interesting. People have looked at the Farmer's Almanac for years and said, gee, isn't it uncanny? They have a whole bunch of things which kind of tend to make sense to come true. And one of them is that a severe winter always has an early snowfall. But that's not coincidence, that's absolute fact. And the reason why is when the first snow falls, the white area reflects 97% of the sunlight coming in, guaranteeing the temperatures directly after snowfall to be cooler than they would have been if there wasn't a snowfall, causing additional precipitation in the form of snow, causing additional sunlight to be reflected, therefore causing the winter to be more severe. In fact, scientists have recently put together reasons why we have colder winters, one of the reasons for having some colder winters. And it's got to do with whether or not the first snowfall takes place on the northern or the southern slopes of the Tibetan Mountains. You say, now, wait a minute, that's for sure the other side of the globe. What's going on?
Right.
Well, what happens is that with the first snowfall, just as we've mentioned, additional sunlight's reflected, causing a colder region. The hot and cold cause high and low pressure areas, and as the jet stream smacks into the Tibetan Mountains, it needs to make a choice whether to go over go up around the north or down around the south. However, when it moves around the Tibetan Mountains, it sets up a pattern which tends, I use the word tends here carefully, which tends to encourage either northern or southern movement of the jet stream around the rest of the hemisphere. Therefore, the first snowfall in Tibet can very much affect what we see in terms of of our winter because our weather patterns are very much controlled by the jet stream. In fact, when we look at the weather patterns we've had lately with drought and so forth, we see that it's really because the jet streams are not where we typically want to find them.
Right.
Our droughts in California have been caused because the jet stream has been about 400 miles too far north. It's been raining buckets up in Washington, Oregon, but California has been having Mexican weather and has been very, very dry, causing a 6-year drought and mandatory water rationing, cutback of agriculture and so forth in California. The most productive area in the country, by the way, for produce. We produce more produce is produced in California, and by produce we're talking about fruits and vegetables, not particularly wheat, than any place else in the country. But many of the orchards have been forced to literally have their trees die for lack of water and so forth because of our long drought. We've also seen this in the southeast, where, again, jet streams being too far north changed the weather pattern significantly enough to cause thousands of chickens to die from the heat, and as well as extreme failure in corn crops and so forth. So our weather pattern is a very delicate system set up upon the difference in temperature between the poles and the equator. With the rotation of the Earth, that difference of temperature, which drives the heat engine, sets up the jet stream, sets up our weather pattern. And without that delicate balance being there, we don't recognize what we end up with. And even small shifts has caused large changes. Now, talking about this meteor impact thing, if I may, which, by the way, is discussed in great detail in the book, The Delicate Balance.
Yes.
It is also, though, something that I've been talking about since this comet going into Jupiter has been recognized in all the science journals, which is about a year and a half ago. It's kind of amazing that it didn't reach the public till now, as many of us have been giving lectures on it before this. But what is exciting and interesting to me is how real this is. In the beginning of your program, it was mentioned that the probability of any individual on Earth being killed by some catastrophic event or by even some natural causes such as snake bite and bear attack, earthquake, I think she mentioned earthquake, but certainly hurricane and lightning and so forth, was equal to a trip on an airplane. It actually turns out that although air travel is the safest means of travel, it is more likely that anyone will be killed by an impact of a foreign visitor from deep space, namely an asteroid or a comet, than they will be by flying, because most people, the average person, takes more than one trip in his lifetime. Mm-hmm. That is very, very significant. Now, she also mentioned that we had this major comet or asteroid fly by the Earth, crossing Earth's path 6 hours apart from where the Earth would have been. And that happened on March 31st, 1989. And indeed, it was close, but it did miss us by something in the order of 500,000 miles. It was found only 6 days after it passed by because no one was looking for it. It also turns out that in 1989 we had 2 other close encounters, and that's 3 in 1 year. And that's
I remember it very well. I remember the Associated Press reports of it, and they were always, gee whiz, we just found out we just had a close encounter.
Again.
Yeah, again.
And each time it was found afterwards, and each time it was because people would examine photographs of the night sky and say, what was that? It wasn't there before, and then make projections for its course and so forth. But because they don't send out big long tails, and we don't see them coming from a long distance, they're not being observed. Well, 3 of them in 1 year was rather unsettling. Remember we mentioned that there was this delicate balance holding things in the Oort belt out there. And one of the things that happened significant, or maybe insignificant, I can't say, because science has never figured out what gravity is. We've got names called the graviton, and we talk about gravity waves, but no one has a clue what it is. We don't know how fast gravity travels. We don't know what it will travel through. We don't know if gravity waves can bend gravity waves. We don't know anything about gravity except Sir Isaac Newton, who we'll talk about later, was sitting under an apple tree, so the story goes, and got hit by an apple. I've maintained that if there were no apple trees, we wouldn't have the word gravity. So, I mean, that's how in the dark we are about gravity. However, if you would take any significance to the event that in 1986, all of the planets lined up in a perfectly straight line, an event which happens only once every 286,000 years, you know that's not a common event. If gravity waves bend or are focused or add together, and we don't know that to be the case. Could that have an effect or a tug on that Oort belt? I don't know. How long would it take for stuff falling out of the Oort belt to fall towards the inner planet?
Yes.
I don't know. How many pieces could fall at a time? Well, if even one piece fell, probably hundreds, maybe thousands of pieces would fall. There's no reason to think a piece would fall when there's 100 billion of them out there in different positions, delicately balanced. Here comes the kicker. In 1989, yes, there were 3, but in 1990, there were 6. That was exciting enough that the science departments of Yale and Harvard put together a team they came up with the first analysis that you were more likely to die if this trend does not go away. Sent then Vice President Dan Quayle to Congress to ask for $125 million, which was appropriated, to build a number of inexpensive, short-sighted telescopes to quote-unquote look for the killer asteroid. Now, it was believed at the time that study was started that there were 40 pieces of space junk, at least a half mile in diameter, that were known to cross the Earth's orbit. And there were, except that in the first 2 years of study, they found 25,000 more.
Oh.
So as we speak, and the number goes up every day, there are 25,000 pieces of space junk, half mile or larger in diameter, that cross the Earth's path. Now, those may not be the most damaging ones because they are not coming from deep space. They are remnant of different things, which we'll talk about later probably, but probably the asteroid belt or whatever that cross our path, but have been fairly stable for obviously a long time. The more concerning are those pieces that will fall out of the Oort belt that we don't have any clue about, that may be of any size between 1 and 10 miles in diameter, as just mentioned, and that is much more concerning, and in the scientific community, it is a real concern.
Let me ask you the question that I have asked others with regard to Shoemaker-Levy 9. Had Shoemaker-Levy 9 been headed directly toward Earth instead of Jupiter, could we have stopped it?
The answer is absolutely not. However, that does not stop science from thinking they have the possibility to do it. There is a joint effort with the USSR at this time to build deep space missiles carrying atomic warheads. And although it's feasible, the realities of it are not. And let me tell you why. Number one is that there is no reason to believe that we will see the thing coming at us long less advanced. Now, with Schumacher, we saw this a year and a half in advance because it already made one close pass by Jupiter, and we saw that. Jupiter's gravity then, said, no, you can't keep going, and pulled it back in, and so we saw this happening. And the only question for the last year and a half was picking the date. Interestingly, science did not pick a set of dates so far apart. They kept picking July 20th and 21st, which I thought was very conspicuous, coincided with the 25th landing of the first man on the moon. But as we know, it came in here for just about a week, from last Saturday to either Thursday or Friday of this week.
That's right.
So it was spread out further than we probably anticipated. We couldn't tell for sure the size of each of the objects because of their distance and so forth. But we were standing by ready and waiting because we had approximately a year and a half notice of the event because of its last close pass, which indeed caused it to break up into fragments. The consideration here, though, is that if we saw 3 in 89 and that we continue to see close encounters passing by us, in fact, the closest was 1993. We had a piece of space junk approximately a mile in diameter, perhaps slightly less, come within half the space of the Earth to the moon.
Oh, boy.
Okay? I mean, closer still, much closer still. When we talk about things closer than the moon...
Under 200,000 miles, I would take it.
Well, if it was half the distance, it would be 125,000 miles.
Uh-huh.
So closer again, which leads us to believe that perhaps, and perhaps likely, we are a meteor shower. Of what duration? We do not know. Will it intensify?
That would mean that the likelihood would be numerically much greater. John, hold on just a moment. We'll be right back to you. It seems to me it would be numerically much higher if that is true. You're saying that we may be in a period of increased frequency of these objects making close passes?
It would certainly seem so. We saw no record of it till 1989. Every year since then, we've seen, a high number. A high number 3 is a high number when you haven't seen it for hundreds of years. That the closest one was just 1993. Time to be paying attention. However, look at the logistical problem we're talking about.
Wait a minute. Important fact here. Are we paying attention now?
I believe we are. I believe we're paying much more attention to the possibility. I think that what has just happened at Jupiter is increasing public awareness and making the public more willing to fund projects that would allow us to see what's going on. However, do remember this. We didn't see the Jovian comet until it was close, making a close pass at the planet. We only know now that it was going to take place because after we saw it go by and we had our eyes trained on it, if you will, we could project where it was going and what would happen a year and a half in advance.
Right. Okay, John. This calls for a little bit of speculation, John. Speculate for me. If they determined that an object was coming, but that we could do nothing about it, in other words, explode things on it as we might, we couldn't change its path, would they tell us? Might indeed. Might, yeah. Might not. Not because Washington would make the decision, but rather because the scientific community and people looking for comets and asteroids, which, by the way, almost all of them are found by amateurs. All of the big telescopes have a very busy schedule, and they're all busy looking at new formations in the sky and distant galaxies and looking for planets around stars and so forth. They're not looking close by, and they don't have time to just sit there looking for something they may not find. They have a real agenda. So if they missed one, joke would be on us.
Well, they're not likely to find it, as I just mentioned.
I understand.
Most asteroids are found by amateurs.
It's an awfully good point, and if it ever happened, if there was anybody around to serve up recriminations, they would be saying, well, then why didn't the London Observatory see it or something? And there'd be people like you trying to explain they weren't looking for it.
They're not looking for it, no. Their budget is to go find life on distant planets or something. It's very...
John, you got to freeze it right there. We're out of time at the top of the hour. Relax for about 6 minutes. We'll be right back to Jack on the CBC Radio Network.
This is a pre-recorded, previously broadcast program.
From the Kingdom of Nye, we continue with your calls on Dreamland with Art Bell. Call Art now, toll-free at 1-800-618-8255. 1-800-618-TALK. First-time callers, area code 702-727-1222. 702-727-1222. Or the wildcard line at area code 702-727-1295. 727-1295 in the 702 area code. Now again, here's Art Bell.
Now again, here I am, Dreamland, on a Sunday evenings. John Zajack is my guest, and we'll get back to him in just a moment. And, John, here's a quick question for you. It came in by fax from Albuquerque. A quick question for your guest. What is your best guess as to when this dark body, the one you referred to, will again pay us a visit? John?
Well, that dark body probably isn't due for, another couple of million years.
Oh, good.
However, that may not be the only cause for such things to occur. So it's not the black body, figuratively called Nimnus, that would necessarily cause this. But if anything's out there that far, barely held on to our sun's gravity, it too may have changed its path and so forth. So we really don't know. That's the whole mystery here, is that we have barely understood some of what's going on, understanding why it may fall out of balance. If we had a real good handle on when things would fall out and when we'd be in deep straits, that would make things easier. Right now, we're just barely smart enough to understand that these conditions occur, and they could fall out of balance quickly. What we're talking about is whether or not mankind, with its infinite wisdom and technological abilities, would just simply send up our nukes and blast the thing out of the sky. Well, it's kind of interesting that even just recently on CBS News, and I'm talking just 3 days ago, they were saying, yes, this is one of the few natural disasters that modern science can prevent. We can't prevent hurricanes. Not exactly true. We could nuke those too, I suppose. We can't, predict or stop earthquakes, something we really should talk about later on. We can't do those type of things, climatic change. But, sure, big rocks flying through space, yeah, we can blast those puppies out of the sky. Let's think about it for 1 second. Number one, we don't have any deep space probes. Number two, we don't have a Saturn V anymore, which was required to get to the moon.
That's true, except as a museum piece.
Except as a non-operational piece. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Our shuttle takes things into low Earth orbit, a couple of 100 miles above the surface of the Earth. Even when we launch the shuttle, have you ever seen one launch on time?
No.
No, I've never have. I mean, there may have been one or two that actually went off within a couple of hours of assigned time. But even then, it takes 4 days just to roll it down to the gantry.
Well, see, that's exactly it, John. I don't think we could do it either. If something right now was close in, found to be headed toward us, we wouldn't be able to do a thing about it. And if that were the case, then if they knew, why say anything?
Well, it depends on who the they is. If it's the amateur scientist, they'll be yelling and screaming to anybody who'll pay attention. If it's the scientific community, they'd probably rush to publish. If it was the government's observatories or paid-for telescopes, they might indeed wish to halt it if they could keep it under wraps. I have a strong suspicion everybody in the know would be making quick phone calls to everybody they cared about.
Mm-hmm.
So it might not be able to be kept well under wraps, although it would only be spread about as a rumor. If I can examine one more little aspect of that, is the following. I mean, how far away would we have to reach it? Some scientists say before it got as close as the moon, 250,000 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
But think about that for a minute. We just finished saying that the thing would have an impact of 100 million megatons. That is to say that that's when its velocity, its energy is converted from potential energy at the site of impact. What are we going to send up? A 1 megaton charge? That's a pretty big weapon to us. A 10 megaton bug? What's 10 megatons going to do against 100 million?
Well, I guess the conventional wisdom, John, is that it would change the orbit not much, but just enough to cause it to miss.
Well, does that mean instead of hitting dead center New York, we only hit Brooklyn with a 100-mile impact? I mean, you see my point. We'd have to be able to see it coming, from great distances. If things moving at close to 50,000 miles per hour,
mm-hmm.
Our fastest rockets travel at 18,000 miles per hour. First of all, do we have the technology and radar to time things so perfectly that we can actually get this thing to explode 100 yards apart from this thing at speeds of 50 or 60 plus thousand miles per hour?
Very problematic, yeah.
Probably not. And we have to get close because most of the energy is not going to go in the direction of the rock. So yeah, it gets more and more unrealistic. That's not to say that the government and our government, that with the USSR, aren't indeed trying to build some deep space missiles to do it. Fortunately, the Russians can launch at will where we can't.
John, I want
the likelihood of it being successful are rather remote.
Right. I want to quickly change directions. About the bottom of the hour, I want to get the phone lines open. Right now, I want to ask you for the short version, if I can, with regard to the Great Pyramid. I'll give you to the bottom of the hour. I know you said it takes about an hour, but if you could give us sort of a shortened version of it or the high points of it. You don't think that an alien race built that pyramid at all? Who do you think built it, and how do you think they did it?
First of all, I don't know who built it, except to say humans probably supplied the horsepower. Okay, that's item number one.
Okay.
Item number two is that to understand what's really taking place here, more important than knowing who built it, who supplied the horsepower, is who supplied the design for it. And the design is so phenomenal, so overwhelming, that I will make a prediction right here and right now that you have never gotten a response on your radio show as strong as the one you're going to get 1 hour after I start talking about the Great Pyramid. It's happened everywhere we've ever gone because this is a very exciting and different approach. I can't summarize it to you in in fast terms because the Great Pyramid story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you need to know why it's unique, then how science was able to establish its uniqueness, then what it did that nothing on Earth could do, and why not only could science not build it, but science could not design it. One of the kickers we're going to get to at the end of that comment is, if every scientist in the world just on paper tried to design the Great Pyramid using all the supercomputers available in the world for any other planet in the entire universe, it could not be done.
Could not be done.
It's a mathematical impossibility. And we will do that, and it's spine-tingling, but you can't do it without going from beginning, middle to end. And if we have just a few minutes before the bottom of the hour, maybe we should close off on this connection thing with the asteroid. And that is to say the following. You know, one of the nice things about your program is it says, let's look at things, let's look at them intelligently, and let's look at all aspects. But let's not put it in a box.
That's right.
And that's really important. And in the delicate balance, we again take this wide view and tie seemingly unrelated things together. The economy, the ecology, scientific development, and so forth. And one of the things that happens as we do this, as we look at meteor impacts, again, which is covered in detail in the book and so forth. It's not something that just happened because of what's going on Jupiter. But as we're looking at those things, very often one says, gee, haven't I heard this someplace before? And sometimes we have. And here comes one of these things, going to sound really out in left field. But what we examine at the same time is prophecy. And not prophecy from Gene Dickens, mind you, but rather from three. I chose purposely to use only three from very different walks of life. And those three are no less than George Washington, the founder of our Constitution in many respects, but certainly the father of our country. Miguel de Nostradamus, probably the most popular secular figure in terms of prophecy, a futurist and a world-renowned physician who would have been famous on that chord alone had he not also been able to foresee and foretell the future.
Yes.
And just because, why not, we look at John at Revelation as well, because as a good scientist, you can leave no rock unturned, and there are things there that seem rather significant.
Well, you almost seem to apologize for its consideration. You need not do that.
Well, I only preface it as I do and give John third billing, so someone wouldn't think that I am trying to be especially religious and or to prove the Bible. Neither of those are the case. But rather to say, let's keep an open mind and let's make the examination. And it's kind of interesting as we approach the close of the hour, the bottom here of the hour, so that we'll go on to the whole new subject of the Great Pyramid, is to say, if what we've just described as these three people being prophets, if they foretold their future, which was now our history, accurately, then maybe we should be paying attention to what they claim our future to be. And indeed, Miguel de Nostradamus speaks of, and he's misinterpreted very widely, but speaks of great devastation happening on planet Earth because of climatic changes, great drought, and pestilence, probably due to food shortage and so forth as well. When the great comet makes its run, and that was, from other quatrains, shown to be in the latter part of the 20th century. Right. And so everyone says, Halley's Comet. Nostradamus is predicting worldwide drought and famine in 1986. But that's not true, and it wasn't true for several reasons. He was speaking of an unknown comet because it does things that Halley's never could come close to doing, including drying up the lakes and rivers and so forth. Not to say we don't have drought and famine presently, but not on the scale that Nostradamus was talking about it being severe worldwide. Right. So Miguel de Nostradamus, it was talking about this great comet. When the great comet makes its run, that all of these universal effects of Earth start changing. John, in the book of Revelation, also speaks of a time when a great mountain, a flaming mountain, is hurled onto the earth, and that it destroys a great city. It's called Babylon, but it's a representation of Babylon, a place of sin, if you will. But we're a great trade center, where he says that all the merchants at sea will wail and grind their teeth, saying, but what city could compare to this great city? Which would cause, by the way, because of its impact, a worldwide earthquake that would leave, quote-unquote, no island left in the sea, no mountain left in its place.
How does Nevada and Las Vegas sound to you?
In terms of safety?
In terms of a target.
Well, there are some who would pick that. I personally think that if we're going to try picking a city of center of commerce, we'd probably have to pick New York. But with child pornography and so forth.
I do believe I detect some New York in your accent, don't
yes,
I?
there's some there that's been trying to be tucked away for about 20-something years.
Why did you leave New York, John?
Seriously? you need a long list of reasons?
No, I don't. I was just wondering if it was connected to prophecy.
No, it wasn't connected to prophecy. It was connected to good weather and to a nicer lifestyle and to get away from some of the rudeness and toughness of New York area. But because there may be no place on Earth that's safe. If we had time to talk about earthquakes later, we'd see that California may be the safest place in the entire country to withstand a major earthquake because they're due within the whole country. But California has earthquake standards and some provisions set up and a mindset that will probably help to handle it. And every mile underground, the telephone company has a 10-foot loop of wire to pick up to allow for movement of ground and so forth without breaking down communications. So the major earthquake we're looking for in California will not be a pleasant one, but any place else in the country would probably be considerably more devastating. Mm-hmm. So the bottom line here is simply that prophecy is something which I keep threading through the things we're doing, and I think it's very significant because it shows that some of these things may not be out of left field but been foretold for centuries. And when we look at the Great Pyramid, we will find that the Great Pyramid is probably, and I say probably loosely, it's almost definitely the most incredible prophetic message ever left on the planet.
Ever left on the planet? Left by whom, John?
Well, we'll have to discuss that, but, again, it's not that I'm claiming it was not built by humans, but that's the horsepower. The question is, who supplied the technology? Who supplied the design? Why was it so important to leave a prophetic message for the planet, which no one can really refute? And it's very interesting how the message is left, but the message is not left in hieroglyphics. It is not left in symbols or terms or words. It is left in the universal language of numbers. In fact, we know from computers that every computer on Earth speaks the same language, regardless of whether it's built by the Japanese or by the French or by the Americans. They all speak the same language.
It's true.
And I have a cousin who, when being presented the information, says, well, a universal message, I mean, if it was really to be so universal and someone wanted to leave a message, why didn't they just leave it on videotape? Why did they have to leave it numerically? And I'm just dumbfounded by that because the Great Pyramid is the oldest structure on Earth. It is 4,614 years old. And as I think of this, I ask him, well, I can't understand Shakespeare, and he spoke, quote-unquote, English just 300-plus years ago, and I can't understand that very well. If we're going to put it on tape, what kind of tape should we put it on? Should it be on VHS, Super VHS? Should it be Betamax? Is it on quarter-inch tape, 3/8-inch tape, half-inch tape, 1-inch tape? At what speed is the tape running? Do you know that the average life expectancy of a piece of plastic tape is 7 years?
Sure.
It's 50 years for a piece of metal tape. How many lines to the inch are we talking about here? Are we talking standard television broadcast, 330 lines? Are we talking home broadcast, which is 220 lines, where we seem to lose resolution? Are we talking on mine, Super VHS, 440 lines? Are we talking super high density? All of this took place in the last 10 years.
So if you wanted to leave a message for the ages, you would roughly build the pyramid.
Well, you would leave it in stone. You wouldn't leave it on tape. You wouldn't leave it in some cryptic language which kept changing.
No, that makes sense.
You'd have to leave it in something universal. The only universal language is that of numbers. And so that's the only possible thing it could have been left in. And certainly it had to be left in stone, for that's the only thing that would last the period of time necessary to get the message to whom it was directed.
Who do you think this message came from? I know I'm probing ahead.
Well, the message came from the designer.
And who do you think the designer is?
Well, I am absolutely positive it was no one from planet Earth.
Oh?
But I also...
Oh?
Yeah.
Oh, really? Now, this kind of goes against what I thought your position was going to be. And that is that it was, in essence, designed and built by Earthlings for Earthlings. And now you're suggesting to me that is not necessarily the case. You think the designers...
I'm not suggesting. I'm making an absolute statement. The horsepower was probably supplied by humans. But the design concept was definitely not.
And on what basis do you conclude that?
Well, you have to, if I told you 3.1497, you went down 17 digits,
yes,
and you didn't understand what pi was, would have no meaning. So we have to first understand why it's unique. Then you can understand why Earthlings couldn't have designed it.
I understand the math is unique. Tell me now why that means Earth people could not have designed it that long ago.
Well, first of all, the technology to do it not only didn't exist then, it doesn't exist now. The second reason why is, and by the way, I'm not suggesting it was made by some clever Martian either. And that almost seems that there's nothing left, but that's not true. The next thing, though, is that I just finished telling you that the greatest piece of prophecy ever left on planet Earth is the Great Pyramid. But how do you explain the ability to foretell the future in such precise ways by anything that's called scientific?
All right. Given the available choices, then.
Oh, I kept hoping you were going to go to break now.
I see. You want.
That was my hanging question.
You want a cliffhanger, huh?
Well, why not?
Well, okay.
And then we could start right in and with the pyramid as soon as we get back and do it up right.
All right, John. Very good. We will do exactly that. John Zajack is my guest, and he wants us to be cliff-hung, so cliff-hung we shall be. And we'll wait till we get back and find out about the Great Pyramid before it kills me. Who designed it? When was it done? Who did the work? He suggests that our long-distant ancestors did. But the designer was not human. The designer was not some Martian. So then, darn it, who was the designer? Perhaps he will suggest that which we regard as a creator was a designer. We'll have to wait and see. Once again, I'll quickly announce my picture now is on AOL for all of you who asked. America Online. If you go into the gallery section, just hit keyword in America Online and go to the gallery. It's in the new files section. It's a gift photograph, computer picture, and a lot of people have asked for it, so there you go. You're listening to the CBC Radio Network. This is...
You're hearing Dreamland with Art Bell. To participate in the program, call toll-free 1-800-618-8255. 1-800-618-8255. First-time callers, area code 702-727-1222. Or the wildcard line at 702-727-1295. This is the CBC Radio Network.
It is. Good evening, everybody. I'm Art Bell. My guest is John Zajack. He is the author of The Delicate Balance and a physicist. And we've been talking about the possibility of collisions on Earth, and now we're beginning to talk about the Great Pyramid. And we're going to have to try and condense it, John, into something less than an hour now, because I do want to get the telephones open. But I also want the story on the pyramid, so I want a lot of things here, John. Probably my cake and eat it, too. Well,
I will try my best. Maybe we can get it in under the hour spot that we talked about.
All right, let's give it a try.
Let's give it a go. First of all, let's just say what the pyramid is. And also, probably what I'm not going to talk about. This discussion is not going to deal with things like sharpening razor blades and mummification of cats and finding your anniversary date and all that kind of silly stuff. I'll look at some really basic, fundamental parts of the Great Pyramid. And what we should know about the Great Pyramid is it's the only remaining great seven wonders of the world. It is indeed the oldest structure on Earth and the largest structure on Earth. Now, there is one pyramid that some people will claim is older, but that pyramid was built in 4 stages. The first stage was nothing more than a burial site, which does predate the pyramid. But of any size, it nowhere comes close to the Great Pyramid in terms of its actual age. Now, we mentioned that the Great Pyramid is the largest structure on Earth, and one would quickly point out that the Great Pyramid is 454 feet tall, and the Twin Towers alone, second tallest building on Earth, is 1,368 feet tall. You say, John, what are you talking about, the biggest structure? Well, Let's just examine that for a moment. The Twin Tower was built by 5,000 people. It took them 11 years using modern equipment. But if we realize that the Twin Towers office building is indeed mostly space, okay, that is to say that there's roughly an acre of space per floor.
Sure. The pyramid is dense, obviously.
The pyramid is, except for a couple of very tiny rooms, is solid stone.
Right.
So if we said, well, let's expand the 209-foot base of the Twin Tower to that of the pyramid being 761 feet, and of course in both directions. And then if we had Godzilla come by and put his big foot on the puppy and squish it down to take the space out between the floors, and the space out even in the floors itself, which is mostly girders and space again, then you'd find that next to the Great Pyramid, which is 454 feet tall, the Twin Towers would be 4 feet 10 inches high.
Yeah. It gives us a scale.
Yeah, another example. You could take all the masonry required to build a highway lane from San Francisco to New York, 8 feet wide and 6 inches thick, and put it inside the Great Pyramid. In fact, when we look at New York with all its tall skyscrapers, we're reminded that it's built on Manhattan Island because Manhattan is rock, and we needed a good base, if you will, to hold up the weight of those large structures. Mm-hmm. But when you consider that even the Twin Tower is only 4 feet 10 inches tall next to the Great Pyramid, you gotta wonder what's under the Great Pyramid. Well, the first coincidence, and I'm very willing to accept it as a coincidence, is that only a few places on Earth could hold the Great Pyramid, and the Great Pyramid just happens to be built on a flat granite mountain, the height of which is the same height as the sand, so that the pyramid could be built on top of it at what we would call ground level, and that would represent the foundation of the Great Pyramid.
So you are suggesting no or a few other spots on Earth could support that weight?
That's correct. Few spots on Earth could support that weight. Absolutely correct.
So how did they know where to build it?
Beats the stuffing out of me.
Okay.
But coincidences happen. Right?
Okay.
An interesting coincidence while we're talking about the Great Pyramid and its height is that modern science, using new techniques from satellites, have been able to pretty accurately measure the height of all the mountains and so forth. And if we take the average landmass of Earth, and this is not insignificant to me, but if you take the average land height of the Earth, the Himalayas being high and Florida being low,
sure,
we find that the average height of land on Earth is 554 feet tall. Same height as the Great Pyramid. But of course, coincidences do happen. Here perhaps is one that's a bit harder to understand. If we took a picture of the globe, when I say picture, I mean if we actually went to the globe, or took a split picture of the globe, one that does not distort land masses, and we decided to find the longest land parallel, that's to say a line parallel to the equator that would go through the longest land line, we would find that line would go through the southern tip of America, the northern tip of Africa, and Asia, and right smack dab through the Great Pyramid. Coincidentally, if we took the longest land meridian, we'd find it to go through Europe and Asia and Africa and Antarctica, and guess what?
The Great Pyramid.
Right through the Great Pyramid. Now, there's only one place on Earth that those lines can interconnect. The majority of places that you'd think could be possible would end up being underwater. But for some reason, way before Columbus sailed the ocean blue to prove that he knew where India was, which of course he was wrong, but long before anybody could have had a global map, the Great Pyramid ends up sitting right in the center of the longest land parallel and longest land meridian. It also does so in such a fashion as to make all four quadrants exactly equal in mass. Very peculiar.
Yes.
How could anyone on planet Earth have distinguished this particular capability and just coincidentally at the same time be fortunate enough to find a solid granite mountain beneath it to hold its weight?
All right. Would these facts, John, give a poor investigator any clue as to the why of the Great Pyramid? In other words, as you look at these things, this coincidence of lines that you've drawn, would it give us any clue as to the why of the pyramid?
No. But it would certainly indicate that someone knew something about the Earth in detail that only modern science knows in terms of center of landmass, height of landmass, etc.
Sure.
At the same time, we always hear about the Great Pyramid being a very precise instrument. But you look at the thing, it looks like a pile of rock. I mean, it doesn't look so precise when you go up to it, does it?
No.
No, not at all. And there's lots of pictures in the book. Maybe we should even tell people how to get it later. But there's lots of pictures in the book showing that. The thing that is not known by most people is that as the pyramid looks is not how the pyramid was built. It is 4,614 years old, but around 1400 or so, a major earthquake loosened one of the top stones of the Great Pyramid. Mm-hmm. The stones that covered the Great Pyramid were called casing stones. Some people might take significance in the fact there were 144,000 of them, 20 tons per piece.
Wow.
These stones, these casing stones, were polished with a smoothness and a fineness equal or better to that of your reading glasses. Think of polishing stone that well. They're also held almost perfectly square of each other, and I'll tell you how they were, the precision of their placement in a moment. But it actually created a mirror that shone light down back upon the earth itself, a pyramid of such brilliance that it could be seen from the mountains of Israel. It's indeed the only structure that could be seen from the moon. Now, I know astronauts have said the only thing they could see on Earth that they could recognize was the Great Wall of China. But the Great Wall of China is like 30 feet wide. Consider that with something hundreds of feet wide and square, also with a mirror surface, and you realize there's no comparison, except that on their flight path and cloud cover, what they saw was the Great Wall.
Well, in addition, a lot of the original reflectivity is no longer there.
Well, indeed, that's true, but I think the Great Pyramid is probably still one of the few structures that can be seen from the moon.
I'm sure.
In any case, the stone under the casing stones were just fieldstones. Okay, they were cut with the precision of the people of the time, with the tools of the people of the time. Mm-hmm. And you might say, well, that's remarkable or it's nice, but it's not overwhelmingly spectacular. Let me go further. By the way, just so we don't lose track of those stones, when the Arabs found the means to topple these stones from the Great Pyramid, they ended up building many of the great mosques of the Middle East and several cities for shahs and others. Kind of interesting, and maybe we'll get to that later, but I doubt it, but dealing with the stones that were stolen. However, as they toppled these down, they would fracture and break some of them, many of them along the way, 20 tons apiece, but beneath the rubble, there were still some casing stones left, and it's those casing stones, the very bottom row, that are pictured in the book and are shown. And after 4,600 years, you can look at these and see their incredible flatness and straightness at 20 tons apiece. In fact, without computer enhancement, you can't see the separation between the stones. They have just 5/1000th of an inch of space between them. 5,000. That's roughly about the thickness of a piece of tinfoil, I guess, between them. But the space was put there on purpose. The space was put there with a precision of better than 2,000. Now, 5,000 is the thickness of a hair from my beard. Okay? So we're talking here in relative terms, the thickness of a human hair is the space between the stones. But that space was precise within 1,000th or two, and was put there to accommodate a white glue to keep the pyramid from absorbing water. That glue, 4,600 years old, is basically as strong as the stones it's gluing together. Cracks start in some stones, but stop at the glue. It is still watertight. You know, Elmers would go nuts for this stuff. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, my soles of my shoes would always fall off. I'd glue them back on. The first puddle, they were off again. Certainly, the shuttle scientists would love to have a glue to keep tiles on their spacecraft. This stuff, after 4,600 years, has been analyzed. We know what it's made up of. It's oxygen and nitrogen and carbon and a few other things, but we can't quite figure out how these things go together to make this incredible glue to last this great length of time. Yet, in the Great Pyramid, it does. And all of these stones are placed so precisely. Now, when I say so precisely, again, we're talking 1 or 2,000th of an inch of their intended spot. Mm-hmm. They're 20 tons apiece. Just to put this in perspective, when they built the High Aswan Dam in in Egypt, they had to move some of their stone statues. They cut them into pieces 10 and 20 tons apiece. They could place those with an accuracy of 1 to 2 inches of the original nesting place.
Really?
Now, if you say, well, they weren't trying that hard, it didn't matter. That might be true, so let's look one step further. The most accurate macro manipulator, that's a fancy word for precision movement of big things, was designed by NASA. Now we're talking, this is modern technology here, right? Well, the biggest item they could move was 1.5 tons, not 20 tons. And the greatest precision that they could possibly muster was 50 thousandths of an inch, not 1 to 2 thousandths of an inch.
But you're busily making a pretty good scientific presentation that we could not have done what you're saying we did. Now, even though
you keep saying
we may have had knowledge I'd be glad to pin you against the wall and try to get to the bottom of who you think it was who did it.
Oh, but let's go. This gets spine-tingling.
Yeah, all right.
To do this, I need to mention something about measurements. Okay?
Okay.
For instance, did you know that, and the reason why is that, we were talking about the universal language of numbers.
Yes.
So we're going to have to measure those numbers. And there's a small difference from what one might anticipate, but I need to explain something about that small number. Did you know, for instance, that the British inch and the American inch, although they were meant to be the same, are not?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, the U.S. Bureau of Standards will list the British inch as 25.39997 millimeters, and the American inch is equal to 25.400508 inches. Millimeters. It's not a lot, and it's accurate for the first 3 or 4 significant digits. But, in fact, only to the third. It changes. It's only accurate to the third. In fact, it's only accurate for the first 2 digits. The third digit's already off, but it's not off by a lot. The point being is that even when you try to copy things precisely, as America did trying to copy the British inch, and we set up a standard for it, and the platinum bar held in temperature and humidity and so forth, there are slight errors to it.
Okay.
And what I want to state is that what happened is that he who broke the code to the Great Pyramid, no less than the greatest scientist that ever lived, recognized that if he used an inch, but not the British inch and not the American inch, it was a slightly different inch, but almost as close to the British inch as the American inch is. Okay, it's off by 1,000th of an inch. Okay, which he calls the sacred Jewish inch. Okay, one might call it the sacred Israeli inch for slightly more accuracy, but he calls it the sacred Jewish inch.
Or the ancient inch.
Or the ancient inch. And that inch is the significance for breaking the code of the Great Pyramid. And it's very important that we talk about that. And it's also important to know that it's not John Zajack who came up with this code, and it's not Joe Schmidlap at 33rd and 3rd Avenue in Manhattan. The greatest scientist ever lived is, without real argument, Sir Isaac Newton.
Yes.
Newtonian physics, most of what we learned about physics was all from Newton. What people don't know about Sir Isaac Newton was that he accomplished all of his great works and discoveries, which were enormous, just absolutely enormous, and we don't have time to go into them all, or even into part of them. He accomplished by age 28. And at age 28, he was trying to prove his theory of gravity, but he had a problem. Science couldn't accurately measure the size of the Earth for him to prove his theory of gravity.
Mm-hmm.
And he needed to know more accurately the size, particularly because he was sure that there'd be a bulge about the equator due to the Earth's rotation. And he had heard that all the history of the world, past, present, and future, was contained within the Great Pyramid. And he went there to find the size of the Earth. P.S. He did not find the size of the Earth. It is there, but he didn't have the means to make the measurements to find it. However, he was so taken by what he found that he dedicated the bulk of the rest of his life to the study of Scripture, and indeed wrote a book about the interpretation of the prophecies in the Bible, published after his death, by the way. In any case, what is it that Sir Isaac Newton found? Well, if you and I took apart a Honda, I won't say a Ford anymore because that might be more confusing, but if we took apart a Honda, we would notice something was pretty significant in terms of a universal commonality. In other words, things turned out to be in equal denominations if we picked a unit that we personally call the meter. or the millimeter, if you will, which is the vision of the meter. But if we said, hey, you know what, if we pick some unit, this becomes a 10 millimeter bolt and a 20 millimeter bolt, and this becomes a 50 millimeter wheel or a 150 millimeter gear or whatever, but everything would work out into millimeters. Well, Sir Isaac Newton found that everything in the Great Pyramid broke out nicely in something called the Sacred Jewish Inch, which is just about as close to the British inch as the American inch is.
Okay.
And when he did this, he started with some basic things. He started with the height of the pyramid and the periphery of the pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's pretty straightforward to do, right?
Sure.
Well, when he did that, he found something kind of interesting. Now, you know that pi is twice the radius of the circle divided into its circumference.
Yes.
So Sir Isaac Newton, just out of curiosity, divided twice the height of the pyramid into its circumference or periphery.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes out to pi to 6 significant digits. Interesting, because in his day, science could not yet predict pi any greater than 6 significant digits.
All right. Well, I think you've made a pretty good case that science at the time could not have done what was done. Who do you theorize did it? Do you believe, John, that it was a...
No, but you can't do that to me yet, because I'm going to prove that something's not possible, but to do that, you have to know the parts I'm going to use to prove it with.
All right.
Let's go one step further. Does the number 36,524 mean anything to you?
Nothing.
Nothing. But if we move the decimal point, that becomes 3, and that's the periphery of the Great Pyramid, by the way, inches. That comes out to 365.24. Now, don't feel bad about this, but how many days are there in a year?
365.
Exactly?
No, I suppose you... are we averaging here with leap years and such?
Well, either way. Most people would say 365 and a quarter, which would be 365.25.
Okay.
You'd say that's pretty close, but not close enough. Because, you see, it wasn't until George Washington's time that we even adopted the Gregorian calendar. And the Gregorian calendar basically says, yep, you'll have a leap year every 4 years to make it come out right, but not exactly. So to make it come out exactly, we have a leap year every 4 years, except in years ending in 00, except in years evenly divisible by 400, in which case we put it back in anyway. Bottom line is, the exact length of the Earth year is 365.24 days, something that the average citizen is not quite aware of, something that we didn't adopt throughout the world until roughly George Washington's time 200 years ago, yet 4,614 years ago, built into the Great Pyramid is this wonderful little thing called the exact length of the Earth day. We've also heard that the Great Pyramid points perfectly due north. That is not true. It is off by 6 minutes of arc. Now, each degree, 360 degrees in a circle. You could break a circle down into 60 minutes, and it's off by 6 of those minutes.
Okay.
Turns out that in the International Geophysical Year, modern science, in its infinite wisdom, decided to build a perfect monument to the Earth and decided to point it due north. Oh, I'm sorry. I said that the Great Pyramid was off by 6 minutes of arc. That's not true. It's off by 3 minutes of arc. The best that science could do in building that monument was to make one 6 minutes of arc off, twice the area of the Great Pyramid. But since the Great Pyramid was built, there has been a movement of the North Pole. In moving that backwards, as best we possibly can, 4,600 years, we find that the Great Pyramid pointed to 0.001 minutes of arc when it was first built.
A lot better than we could do. John, hold on just one moment. We'll be right back to you. Do you have harvest? And I want to ask John. John, we've got about a minute now, and you're leading us down a very careful path. So tease us with what's just ahead a little bit in the path.
Well, what I'm going to tease you with is what directly ahead. So far, we've talked about whoever designed the Great Pyramid knew an awful lot about planet Earth and had technology greater than we presently possess today. However, one could say, could that not have been built by a smart Martian? Perhaps. But so far, all we've looked at is the evidence on the outside of the Great Pyramid. As soon as we come back, we're going to look at what takes place on the inside of the pyramid, which not only excludes humankind, but excludes those Martians and Venetians as well.
All right. Well, I'm going to look forward to that. John Zajack. And next we find out what's inside the pyramids that would exclude us and exclude any grays or greens or whatever they might be. Okay, I'm up for that. Once again, I want to mention my picture. Welcome to Dreamland, a program dedicated to an examination of areas in the human experience not easily nor neatly put in a box. The unexplained, the unusual, the unknown. This is Dreamland. Taking a pretty good trip around the outside of the pyramid, and I think you've proven your case, but I guess you want to prove it a little further by going inside. What's inside?
Well, the information inside is very different. The outside shows that it understood planet Earth very well. One item we did not get to mention, many we didn't mention, but one significant item that we should keep track of is that the Great Pyramid has a slope on it, which is peculiar, but allows it not to cast a shadow at noon on the vernal equinox, something that will come up importantly later. But when we get inside the pyramid, the whole message changes. And what we'll do this now in Panavision for all your viewers, but basically the Great Pyramid is the only pyramid that didn't have hieroglyphics, did not have a burial chamber, does not have any treasure, does not have any body in it. It basically has two shafts, a downward sloping path called the descending passage, an ascending passage which comes off of that going up at the same angle the other one is going down. It breaks into something called the Grand Gallery, where these passages that are only about 3.5 feet tall suddenly jump up to 28 feet high. Off of that Grand Gallery at the top is something called the King's Chamber, and off the bottom is called the Queen's Chamber. And the Queen's Chamber floor intersects the ascending passage and produces an angle. And we'll get into that angle momentarily. Now, when Sir Isaac Newton went into this, very simple little stuff inside, the ascending, descending passage in the Grand Gallery, and that angle we talked about. When he got inside, though, he recognized that in the whole pyramid, there is only one set of scribe lines. No hieroglyphics, no words. In fact, the Great Pyramid was actually built 500 years before the invention of the spoked wheel, and before the invention of hieroglyphics. But the scribe lines coincide with what he calls the year 2141 BC, a time that the original or earlier North Star shone down its very narrow passage. The North Star does not yet shine down that passage. It is due to happen in the future. We probably won't get to talk about it. In any case, from that point, he says, if I measure in what he called sacred Jewish inches and call each inch a year, something rather interesting happens. If he goes forward from those scribe lines up to the face of the Great Pyramid, he comes up to the year 2623 BC, the year that the Great Pyramid was completed. If he goes down the passage, he comes to the point where the ascending and descending passage split, and that happens in the year 1453 BC, which coincides with the exodus of the Israelis from Egypt. As he continues going up the ascending passage, he comes to the year 33 AD, in which case this tiny little passage explodes into this huge room with a 28-foot high ceiling, coincidentally called the Grand Gallery or the Passage of Light and Knowledge, on the year 33 AD. Most interesting.
Yes.
What he does then is looks closely at that triangle that we mentioned. The horizontal floor of the Queen's Chamber intersects the ascending passage right at the beginning of that chamber. And again, if we consider this a triangle, the horizontal leg would be equal to the beginning of that great passage opening, if you will. And that coincides not only with the year 33 AD, but the Great Pyramid, measured by laser and other techniques, is the most heavily measured structure on planet Earth, measured to thousandths of an inch, comes out to not only a year, but they can actually pick the day. And that comes up to the year 33 AD on April 3rd, coinciding with the crucifixion of one man of earth that we call Jesus Christ.
Right.
If we look further at that triangle, we will see that where the corner of the triangle comes together on September 29th, 2 BC, Christ's birth. You say, well, wait a minute, Christ was born in the year 1. Most people think, I suppose he was born in the year 0, but there was never a year 0, so it had to have been born in the year 1.
Right.
But there's a 2-year error in our calendar, and in the past we always used the same references going back, and we used the reigns of kings to determine how long ago things took place. And one king in history ruled twice, second time under a different name, caused a 2-year error in our calendar. So indeed, we now know that Christ was probably born in the year 2 BC. Some will argue 3 BC. But basically, we know there's an error in our calendar. It's about 2 years. 2 years places it into the BC 2. So here we have this Christ triangle, as it's called. The Christ triangle depicts 3 dates depending upon which leg you measure, either Christ's birthday, his crucifixion, or the other leg comes up at October 14th, 29 AD, the date of his baptism. Interestingly, if we take that Christ angle, keeping the angle very precise, and it is very precise, it's 26 degrees, 28 minutes, 9.63 seconds. Trust me, nothing gets more accurate than those numbers. You place that over an area on a map of the Middle East, or where the Great Pyramid is, putting that triangle exactly as depicted here over the Great Pyramid itself, so that one of the corners of the Great Pyramid, we find that there is a horizontal line running parallel to the equator. The other line goes right through Bethlehem. Goes right through Bethlehem. In fact, if standing on the Great Pyramid, one would see the sun rise, literally, on the longest day of the year, directly over Bethlehem. So what we have is something that is mind-boggling. What we have is a structure using science, modern science can understand but can't duplicate, that is putting together a prophetic message of the future, for it was built 4,614 years ago, talking about the greatest natural event, or the greatest event to affect mankind on planet Earth, to be a person born in Bethlehem in the year 2 BC, the way our calendar counts. And that is absolutely mind-boggling. For whoever built this could no longer be just a clever Martian understanding science, technology, and the Earth, but has to be someone who is able to either foresee the future thousands of years in advance, or control the future so importantly that far in advance that we could only call it supernatural. If you combine that with the fact that this is obviously a message of a spiritual leader, you end up with an amazing paradox that it can't be a human, and it really can't be, quote-unquote, intelligent life forms from another planet.
So your conclusion, I think, is what my guess was, that somehow this information, this technology, was imparted by a supernatural force, which you probably would view to be from our Creator. John?
Well, scientifically, I can't define God, but I can say that what we're talking about can only be defined as supernatural. And you know what? It goes one step further if we examine the mathematics of it. Remember I kept saying, well, that could be a coincidence, that could be a coincidence?
Yes, you were building your case.
Yeah, but you know what? It's mathematically impossible. Let me tell you what I mean. If I asked you to draw on a piece of paper a 1-inch diameter circle, you could do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I asked you to draw on a piece of paper a square with a 1-inch leg, you could do that.
Yes.
If I asked you to design a triangle where 2 sides of the triangle were 1 inch in length, you could do that.
Yes.
However, if I asked you to design me a 3-sided square where all points were equal distance from the center,
Can't do it.
That's mutually exclusive. That's 3 separate things. None of the above can happen simultaneously.
Right.
Because each one of those is a unique object, and you can't have a round square or a 3-legged square.
Right.
Therefore, it's mutually exclusive. No one in the world has ever looked at this, but look at the mutual exclusivity. I can't say that. Look at how exclusive what we're going to be saying is. The Great Pyramid's height is fixed by the average height of mass on Earth. Yes. Pyramid height is fixed.
Yes.
Its periphery is fixed because it is equal to the length of the year. Right?
Yes.
Now, if I ask you to design pi into that, you say, wait a minute, I can't do that unless it already happened, because you can't change the periphery height ratio if the periphery and the height are fixed. Yet, it comes out to pi. Mutually exclusive. All the greatest scientists in the world with an entire universe.
All right, let me stop you here. John, you are making the case, are you not, that the Great Pyramid is, without knowing its source, prophecy in numbers.
Absolutely.
All right, if you can mathematically derive the biblical events that you talked about, can you derive any further prophecy, or is yet unrevealed prophecy from the same numbers?
I can't. There is a date further up where the Grand Gallery, ends, and that's the year 1914, start of World War I, first global war, invention, if you will, of a culmination of modern technology from a medical standpoint, aviation standpoint. Technology really started exploding in the beginning of the 20th century. But no, after that, there are those who will argue that the timeline changes to an inch per month, et cetera, making a closer cosmetic look at what's taking place, microscopic look. I don't particularly follow it. Most people making predictions of the future have kind of put the square peg in the round hole in my mind, and usually been proven wrong if the date ever got to pass. So no, I do not see directly what it's telling us about our future. It is really, I think, showing some key points, but that the most significant point was that of the birth and crucifixion of a very significant figure in our history, which most would not argue was the most significant event to happen on planet Earth. You could be Jewish or Muslim or whatever. You have to be Christian to say, belief in Christianity probably affected more the world than anything else.
All right, John, I do want to open the telephone lines, so let me do that. Let everybody ask a few questions. You've had a lot to say, and there's a lot to ask. On the toll-free line, you're on the air with John Zajack. Hello.
Good evening, Art. Portland, Oregon, KEX.
Yes, sir.
I have a couple of questions for Mr. Zajack.
Yes.
In reference to Edgar Casey, first of all, in reference to Edgar Casey, the psychic who you failed to mention earlier, what's your opinion of his prediction that the pyramids, ancient Hall of Records, would be located, and that its builders were Atlantean colonists? And two, what's your opinion of the effect of the upcoming alignment of the planets in our solar system on the Earth and its precession?
All right, thank you.
I didn't mention Edgar Casey only because I was not trying to look at all prophets, but rather three unique ones. There may be some significance to things that Edgar Casey has done. Some things looked important. I could never put my finger on the precision of it and authenticity of most of it. That's not to say it wasn't authentic. I could. In terms of the upcoming alignment of the planets, we had the most significant one that I'm aware of in 1986 when they were all in a perfectly straight alignment. Usually when we talk about alignments, we're talking within so many degrees, right, either 90 or 20 or something. But in 1986, they were perfectly in a straight line. I don't expect anything more spectacular than happened in 86, and I'm not sure that anything happened in 86. These things are very far apart and pretty small. However, so are the force changes necessary to knock things out of the Oort belt. So if things were knocked out of the Oort belt in 1986, the question is, how long does it take to fall in towards sun before we see them? And the answer is, I don't really know. They may be moving at 48,000 miles per hour when they get close to the Earth, but they start out moving at 20 miles an hour. So one doesn't know. One can only speculate.
All right. Wild card line, you're on the air with John Zajack. Hello.
Good evening, Art.
Good evening.
Okay, let me turn my radio.
Where are you, sir?
KBI.
That'll be up in the Washington area. Okay.
Yeah, up here in the.
All right, go right ahead, sir.
Listen, your guest here revolves everything around Christ's birth. He fails to acknowledge that Buddha was born in 563 B.C. In Buddhism, the Buddhist missionaries went over to Mesopotamia and the Tigris and the Euphrates, and they spread the seeds of the concept that there is a higher being.
Well, perhaps so, but apparently the mathematics does not surround Buddha. It surrounds Christ. Does that disturb you?
Yes, it disturbs me a lot.
Well, I guess there's nothing we can offer that man, is there, John, except the math is the math.
Yeah, one needs to put one's personal preferences and biases aside when looking at evidence.
And that is what that sounded like, too. On the wild card line, you're on the air with John Zajack. Hello.
Yes, good evening from Albuquerque. Question. Now, this was on your show, Art, a few weeks ago. There's going to be a discovery of an ancient library within the pyramid. Is that so? Is that in the waiting?
John? Oh, you're asking me. I'm sorry, I thought you were referring to an old program of yours.
Well,
not that I'm aware of. Apparently, from a previous caller, Edgar Casey, so stated. I have no opinion on this comment.
Okay. All right, thank you. On the toll-free line, you're on the air with John Zajack. Hi.
Good evening, Art. This is Jim in St. Louis.
Hi, Jim.
Finally, St. Louis, we get the full 3 hours of the show. We love it. We love it here in St. Louis.
Good.
Anyway, great show. I had a couple questions for your guest. He mentioned earlier that men provided the horsepower. What actual means do they have to construct this themselves? And secondly, is he familiar of this Hall of Records that might lie beneath the Sphinx?
All right.
I really doubt the Hall of Records is beneath the Sphinx. We have in San Jose a Egyptian museum that talks about a secret passage that goes between the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx. And I asked the curators, why do you speak of something you've never found? They go, well, it must be there because why else would the Sphinx be nearby? And I go, well, that's the most convoluted argument I could possibly imagine. I don't think the Sphinx has anything to do with the Great Pyramid per se, except that its proximity. Also, it did not weather well with time. If you look at the Sphinx, they're always trying to plaster it up and fix it. It's made of soft sandstone, not of the hard limestone that is impervious to the elements as the casing stones of the Great Pyramid were. I don't know anything about a Hall of Records or any great library that would be found. It's not to say it isn't there. It's not to say anything about it except I personally am unfamiliar with it.
All right, John, we'll leave that one alone. What about the physical construction? What kind of technology could have accomplished that?
Well, that's a mystery. The Japanese recently just spent a great effort with something like 2,000 workers trying to make a scale pyramid with much smaller stones. And they set out to prove that they could figure out by rollers and by slides and by doing other things, and of course they could use measurements such as laser beam. And they basically said, complete mystery, even the Japanese can't do it, was their conclusion.
So
that was building a small one.
So the Japanese cannot accomplish it. On the toll-free line, you're on the air with John Zajack. Hello.
Art, how you doing? Mike in Albuquerque.
Yes.
What about the...
Turn your radio off, please.
I wish I could. It's my neighbors.
Okay, well, thank you then for the call. And wildcard line, you're on the air with John Zajack. Hello.
Hi, this is San Diego.
Yes.
Quick opinion do you have, John, on monuments on Mars, the structures on the moon, and what's your opinion of these mysteries surrounding the Bermuda Triangle?
Okay.
Well, first, I have seen a picture which has been reportedly taken on the surface of Mars. I've also seen one that looked like Ted Kennedy, they tell me. However, I've gone through all the slides from NASA, and I've never seen them in the originals from NASA. So where these came from, what tabloid, I couldn't answer. I'd need to see more and make sure it's not just illusions and light work and so forth. But nothing. I have seen nothing to make me feel that there's really something there. Now, there may be, but I have seen nothing from NASA, which is my source, to conclude that. In terms of the Bermuda Triangle, there are some areas of the Bermuda Triangle which have just been exaggerated and put out of proportion. Certainly, Edgar Casey thought a great deal about it, thought that Atlantis would one day be found. That's really a discussion for a whole other program. Can't go into it much, except to say that much of what we see reported about the Bermuda Triangle easily explained away without supernatural phenomena.
All right, very quickly on the toll-free line, you're on the air with John Zajack.
I was wondering about a couple of things that I heard about. One was that geologists think the Sphinx is at least 9,000 years old, and the other was, I think, who said that the blocks of the pyramid are not actually stone blocks at all, but they're
concrete blocks.
All right, we'll answer those when we come back. John, we're at the bottom of the hour. You're listening to the CBC Radio Network called Dreamland. John?
Your last caller had asked two questions. First was, if we say that the Great Pyramid is the oldest structure on Earth, what about the Sphinx, which is at least twice over 9,000 years old? And the answer to that is, yeah, it's way over 9,000 years old, in fact, because the Sphinx is made out of a natural outcropping of stone, sandstone, and was carved. The Sphinx is carved, not built. Therefore, it's as old as whatever made it, but it wasn't made by mankind either. It's a natural formation that's carved. In regard to the Great Pyramid saying that the stones were not carved, but rather a cement that was molded, if you will, I've heard this argument, but I'm even more impressed because not only was what we call cement not invented afterwards, but think of the control problem. How would they have made the mold? How would they do the same? How would you prevent shrinkage? How would you prevent the warpage that takes place? Molded, no two are alike. Talk about precision. More impressed if it could have been a cement that was molded and popped out of a mold. Even more so than just the carving, which is spectacular all by itself.
What about the materials in the blocks? He asked about that. He said perhaps it is not stone, or some people have thought it is not stone.
Well, he was suggesting that it was some type of cement.
Oh, I see.
That'd be even more.
Sure, that would entail later technology. Wild Klein, you're on the air with John Zajack.
Radio Free America.
Yes.
Listen, my knowledge of the subject is not real big, but I'm wondering if there's any correlation to the pyramid of adding to the Ten Commandments or the possibility of the refinding of the Ark of the Covenant pyramid correlate.
All right. Do you find any math that coincides with those events?
I see nothing that coincides except that the Ark Covenant's dimensions are exactly easily divisible by the dimensions of the king's chamber. In other words, the Ark of the Covenant dimensions multiplied by a constant. Also, the only thing that I know of with regard to the Ten Commandments is that there are 3 granite looks that they could not carve through and had to carve around to get past the ascending passage, which is believed to have come from the same mount because the very unique red granite that the Ten Commandment tablets were carved in. But you can't absolutely prove that, but it does test against minerals extremely well.
All right. On the toll-free line, you're on the air with John Zajack. Hi.
I hope you'll take a skeptical call.
Of course. Where are you calling from?
I live in Sparks.
Sparks, Nevada. All right. Go ahead, sir.
Well, your statement that modern technology can't reproduce the pyramid is wrong. In fact, I've seen a lot of stories and reports and a record of graduate engineering students actually seeing the model of the pyramid or a section thereof. It's been repeated more than once. So that statement that modern science can't do that is absolutely wrong. Secondly...
Okay, where was this done, sir? Just for the record.
I seem to remember the story in National Geographic. It was a story about the pyramids, and then there was a small section that reported the technology and how it was built. But I wanted to also bring up something I've seen on computer bulletin board. It was a mathematical proof that Barney the dinosaur was actually Satan, because by breaking down the letters and playing with numbers in a certain way, you came with the number 666. So my complaint is that these mathematical games, when you only use the numbers to define what you want to come out, really don't mean anything.
It is now that is an interesting criticism, John, and I was going to ask you about that myself, that in essence, if you play long enough and look at events, begin to string them together, as you suggest is your specialty, or connecting events, you can set out and finally prove about anything.
Absolutely. If I wanted to find my birth date by finding the 77th tier 2 inches over from the top and, some other stone 2 inches from some other place, I'm sure I could do that. However, one must realize that if you want to contrive things, tell me how. All we looked is the height of the pyramid, its periphery. Period. There's nothing contrived about that. When we got into the pyramid, all we measured was the length of the passages, period. And we used the same unit of measure throughout, from the outside to the inside. So if you want to contrive things, be my guest. But it's really hard to contrive things. I mean, when you talk about Barney and the number 666, well, 666 is easy to come by. Who said it was Ronald Reagan, his house address?
Yeah, that's right.
666 is not an exclusive
Never. And they tried to get there. The trick is going the other way. If you look at something and only measure its height and its periphery and the length of passages all in the same measurement and all these things in place, that's not being constructed.
All right, what about graduate student projects that have created pyramids?
Well, the first thing is that if the graduate students trying hard to be published, you wonder what they're going to say. But second of all, I can assure you that no one's ever solved the problems of the Great Pyramid. They could build them up and say, look, we built these stones, and with pulling people, we moved 1-ton stones, we had more people, we could pull more, and they could get that conclusion. However, the Japanese demonstrated when you went up in scale, the things that supported this weight no longer worked. Because the Japanese, funded by the Japanese government, attempted to build a scale model of the Great Pyramid. I think it was like a 1/4 scale. It lapsed under its own weight because things we didn't talk about. The Great Pyramid has things like cornerstones that have special anchor mechanisms that we have only on modern bridges, and so it bolts and sockets and so forth to allow it to have lasted this time. Other pyramids, even Egypt, 4 copies of the pyramids have bulges on them because of its great weight. They literally can't stand. The pyramid is unique, even to Egyptian pyramids, and there has never been anybody of any credible value ever making the claim that they could understand how it was done or if they could replicate it.
All right. Hi there. On the toll-free line, you're on the air with John Zajack. Where are you calling from, please?
Hello?
Hello. Where are you calling from, sir?
L.A. Turn the radio down.
Turn the radio off, actually.
Yes, sir. I sure did.
All right, go ahead.
Well, regarding the Great Pyramid, there's a couple of passages in the Old Testament, I think, regarding that. I could only find one. From what I can gather, it also speaks of Christ, and that's in Isaiah chapter 19, and that's starting with verse 19.
Yes, very common passage.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you're familiar with that?
Oh, of course. There's so much that we couldn't get into in this short period.
What's your interpretation of it? Do you think that that's speaking of the pyramid?
It sure sounds exactly like the pyramid. For everyone else's edition, that passage, I could look it up and quote it to you, but basically it says that an altar to the Lord will be built in the center of Egypt at its border, which in the first place sounds like a contradiction because how could it be at the center and at the border? But there were always 2 Egypts, the Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, the different pharaohs wearing different colored hats, and the borderline between Egypts goes right through the pyramid. What a coincidence.
What a coincidence.
And of course, the Giza pyramid, the Great Pyramid is called the Pyramid of Giza, which also means the border of the river, I suspect. Actually, the word pyramid isn't even Egyptian. It's Greek from the word pyros and mitos, I guess, but basically means center of knowledge and wisdom.
All right, John, on the toll-free line, you're on the air with John Zajack. Hi, where are you calling from, please?
Portland, Oregon.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I had a question for your guest. I wanted to know if he believed that Christ that he would be the Son of God and Savior of the world, and what his opinion on the Bible was, and if his research, if at all, affected his belief of it.
All right. Care to talk about your beliefs at all, John?
Well, sure, why not? Because biases can't be removed. Though my book does not try to make a case for it except to show similarity between science and theology, stating that they need not be diametrically opposed. I do, in fact, accept Jesus Christ as the Son of God, and I think that there's a lot of things that can be proved scientifically within the Bible, though I am not trying to prove the Bible. Rather, that when I do the scientific investigation as a scientist, one says, but haven't I heard some of this before? And just as the other caller said, gee, does the Bible refer to the Great Pyramid? It's interesting to note that it might, but I don't make a big deal about it.
I would like to understand, John, how you structured your research. Did you start out trying to find some connection to the dates, the birth of Christ, et cetera, crucifixion, all the rest of that, or were you led to that by the numbers?
Actually, what I was doing was research for myself. I wanted to know if was the air safe to breathe. Should I live in California? Going to fall off into the ocean? Are the banks going to be there? Is the financial system, secure? And I did this research as a research scientist for me. Where do I start a family? Where do I live? Where do I place my investments? What do I eat and what do I breathe? And as I did that, my colleagues would corner me for hours at a time wanting to know what I had found out. And that got to be so tiring that I did a video one day, quite by accident, while doing a commercial for Motorola, where there's just a John, tell tell the director what you told me about so-and-so, and we did that, which later got shown in movies, converted or transcribed into the book.
Well, maybe before we're short, John, your book is The Delicate Balance. How people get it?
Well, it's a whopping $10. One could get it, I think, at Walden's bookstores, but you probably have to kick them twice to order it. Oddly enough, most Christian bookstores carry it. They can call my office to order an autographed copy of it. Oh. And they can do that at 408-226-0750. And there will be operators all day tomorrow. There might actually be some just after the broadcast tonight as well.
All right. It's area code 408-226-0750?
Yes.
All right, one more time. Area code 408-226-0750. People love autographed copies.
Well, goody.
All right, you may be signing quite a bit. On the wildcard line, you're on the air with John Zajack. Hi.
Hi, Art. I'm listening on KOPE, Rogue River, Oregon.
Yes, sir.
We're about to run out of time, and your guest is not related to what George Washington and Nostradamus and the Book of Revelation all had in common. I hope you can do that now.
All right. John?
Well, it could easily be another program, but they all foresaw the future. George Washington and Miguel de Nostradamus saw World War III very vividly and clearly. George Washington also saw the Revolutionary War and its outcome, the Civil War and its outcome, and the only other war besides those two which threatened America, which is World War III. And in World War III, he talks about it being global, the whole world against the United States, where the cities are destroyed by fire before the invading army approaches the shore of America, which can only be what we now describe as atomic warfare, something that is unthinkable during George Washington's time and the technology which existed then. Miguel de Nostradamus saw a pestilence, warfare, Great Plagues, the comet, if you will, for our future and World War III. He was very explicit about World War II, naming the countries involved, the leaders of those countries, how and when they would be taken over, the weapons to be used from submarines shooting torpedoes, and in World War III, submarines, they could fire fish through the air. We still call torpedoes fish.
Yes.
They hit in enemy cities. And of course, John in the Book of Revelation speaks of a time of great famine and drought and pestilence, worldwide earthquake. By the way, we have 6,000% more earthquakes today than we had just 40 years ago. A great one about to happen momentarily in Japan. It's going to devastate the whole Western banking system. And of course, John in the Book of Revelation talks about the Battle of Armageddon. And if that's not a good description of how World War III is culminated, then I don't know what is. So they all had common ground. They all stated it in different words, but they overlap very, very clearly in their predictions for the future.
All right. Wildcard line, you're on the air with John. Whoops, would have been on the first-time caller line. You're on the air with John Stack. Hi.
Hi.
Well, I guess he's gone. On the toll-free line, you're on the air. Hello.
Hello, Carson, California.
Yes, Carson.
I'm curious, one of the interesting Bible verses your guest hasn't alluded to, at least from what I've heard, is the one where a star called wormwood apparently falls in all the fresh water, making all fresh water undrinkable and deadly. And some prophecy-type preachers in the radio have equated that star to be some kind of mineral that is actually poisonous to the freshwater system. And I'm curious, is your guest aware of any asteroid or comet that would potentially have some kind of a mineral or a compound in there that could do that kind of damage to all fresh water?
All right, wormwood.
No, but I'll tell you one thing real interesting about wormwood, and I guess it's written in Greek in the original, and Greek in wormwood comes out Chernobyl. And so, what a coincidence again. Chernobyl is wormwood. And if I talk about the waters being poisoned, I can't think of a better way to do it through radiation, but I think it's mankind doing it to mankind that will accomplish that particular task.
All right. Toll-free line, you're on there with John. Where are you calling him, please?
Anchorage, Alaska.
Yes, sir.
This is Martin, ufologist, theologian. We've talked lots of times.
Yes, Martin.
Couple of questions. I'm curious. I think that it is possible that there could be a combination of extraterrestrial or superior intelligence other than earthly, and not necessarily the supreme being involved here. Is it not possible?
Well, only if that extraterrestrial being had the desire to promote religion and at the same time had the ability to control events thousands of years in advance. And then you'd be right. Then my only question is, why is he promoting religion, and why is he telling the whole world that these events will occur on these particular times, particularly the most significant one is the birth and crucifixion of Jesus Christ?
Well, my real question would be not regarding necessarily religion, but the truth. I mean, that's my religion, but religion can make beliefs, many of them false.
Oh, but what I'm saying is that if this Martian, if you want, for want of a better term, not only understood the Earth, but could also control future events on planet Earth with good precision, why is he doing it with such a obviously religious figure, except to promote religion? I'm not saying religion isn't bad, and I'm not saying some religions are not equal to other religions. I'm just saying, obviously, Jesus Christ is a religious figure. Why was the message directed at a religious figure?
Yeah, I have a problem with the term religion, in that most
you want to be spiritual. I mean,
okay, there you go. Okay, there you go.
Okay.
Well, then, okay, I don't have a problem with that.
Neither do I.
Do you believe that, planet Earth is the only place that God created life?
No, and nothing that I said here suggests.
Okay, well, if they just built life from other places, I mean, said we are not of this world, and he had sheep which were not of this flock, and I would interpret
that could certainly have been the tribes of the 10 tribes from Israel. But
that's what's been assumed by
but all I'm saying is, even if he created life on other planets, or if life evolved anyway on other planets, my only concern here is that could some other life form, regardless of how technologically advanced, be able to predict and control the future so well? And if so, why would it be centered around a spiritual figure?
Okay. Wildcard line, you're on the air with John Zajack. Hi.
Hi. When we're talking about the asteroids and so forth, how big a piece would it take to hit the Earth with such force that it would sort of like pop it and let the hot stuff out from the inside?
Well, good point. I'm not sure how much the hot stuff would come out, but surely in sizes that we're talking about, somewhere between 2 and 5 miles in diameter, we would probably move the Earth off its course somewhat. We would probably shake it off its axis. We would probably create a wobble. Aside from the earthquakes and the tidal waves, which would be over 300 feet high and circumvent the globe several times. By the way, a 300-foot wave would probably climb 1,000-foot mountains without any difficulty. Aside from all of that, it would certainly cause eruptions worldwide, and certainly a lot of hot stuff coming out from where the impact was. But it would do other things too, like knock it off its axis, push it off its orbit slightly, create dust and debris. It would be, well, at the very beginning of the program we said, something like a catastrophe. Well, let me tell you, the world recorded history has not only never seen one like this. It can't possibly imagine all the ramifications and destruction of what we call planet Earth and our society due to it.
John, we're way short on time. I guess I would like to sort of wrap up by saying we didn't have enough time. Could obviously have used a couple programs more. We will have you back again, possibly on the other syndicated program as well.
Well, thank you.
Let me give out again the telephone number where people can order your book. Is that all? Did you have videos as well?
Well, when people call, we can talk about it, but there are some audios on different aspects, including the Great Pyramid and some of these other subjects as well.
All right. It's area code 408-226-0750, correct?
Correct.
Okay. John, it has been wonderful having you here.
Well, thank you.
And we will have you back.
Well, super.
All right?
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, John. John Zajack, and I'm sorry.